In today's world, we have to question our human health in relation to the electric universe. I wonder just how much electricity affects our bodies. I am really interested in learning about how electrical interactions take place within the human body. Minerals within the human body, such as calcium and manganese, allow for calcium ion to conduct with the hemoglobin and red blood cells. Minerals such as manganese and the radioactive isotope manganese 54 shows decay faster prior to a solar flare erupting up to 36 hours prior to the flare event itself. We feel the changes here on Earth taking place, even within our human body. The more concentrated these minerals are in our system, the more likely we are to feel these subtle changes, making some what's called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. I feel these changes when they take place, and it's caused me to try to understand as much as I can about this subject. So let's start with fertilizer and foods that we consume, and then discuss the role of free radicals and antioxidants, then continue the conversation into a plausible solution for the free radical problem. So let's get started. August Dunning, welcome to the show. Could you give us a quick summary of your background and what you discovered with fertilizer in today's world? And if you'd like to expand our understanding on GMOs and gluten and the digestive problems associated with that, please feel free. August.
Great. It's really nice to be here. It's nice meeting you guys at the Phoenix show, and I'm happy to be here to talk about these subjects. My interest goes back to when I was about 8 or 9 years old, reading my dad's medical textbooks instead of going to baseball practice, and became very interested in human physiology and metabolic process a long time ago. I almost went into pre-med. I was going into neurosciences in college. My father said, "Don't bother. It's just going to be socialized medicine. It's going to ruin medicine." He was right. So I went into physics and engineering and all that stuff instead. Worked for NASA, the space station program. Worked for Pratt & Whitney Space Propulsion on liquid, solid, and electric propulsion systems out of China Lake and Edwards Air Force Base, the rocket labs, and learned about what the Russians were doing in nano propellants and ionic states of matter. And it turns out that through further reading, our bodies can only use ionic elements out of food. And what happens is the microorganisms grind down rock, excuse me, into ionic forms, which are then taken up into the plant because only ions can go through plant roots and leaf cells. So ionic elements can fall out of the sky on the leaves, can be absorbed, or ionic elements can be provided by a microorganism in the soil and be absorbed, and they're taken up in the plant's metabolic pathways to create the phytochemical compounds, which are great antioxidants, which are essentially electron donors, which will, of course, get into the whole idea of earthing and grounding and this sort of these new technologies that actually work. And I know all about these guys, know Clint Over and all that stuff. My interest came in a bet that was given to me at Caltech, saying, you're such a smart ass, I bet you can't take salt out of salt water. And I thought, well, maybe. And I did, but I had all these minerals left over, actually just as goo. And I took it over to the chem labs, and they tested it, and they said, well, this is like everything in the periodic table. Where'd you find this stuff? And I said, well, I'm just doing some experiments over at CAC. And he goes, all right, well. So I ended up looking into this stuff, and I said, you know what? Because at about the same time, I met Charles Walters from Acres USA, and he had written a book about and with Maynard Murray, a Navy doctor during the 40s, 50s, that was doing a lot of seawater applications to agriculture, but he couldn't solve the problem with the salt because you'd have to dilute seawater so much. You'd also be diluting the minerals, and if you know anything about mineral content in seawater, it's like 0.1% of the gallon of water. So you start diluting it even further, but he got great results. So when I was able to put this on agriculture, I was getting great yields, great taste, great flavor. Started testing it, and I got great nutrient mineral content again. Then started getting into researching the USDA and FDA records of food mineral content, and found that there's a correlation between the decrease in minerals in food because of soil depletion and the increase in nutrient deficient diseases based on mineral deficiencies. So my whole work right now is twofold. One is in the agricultural industry to have these farmers use minerals to have better crops so people don't get sick, and I'll get into that when we get into the deeper parts of this conversation. And of course, the cannabis industry, because it turns out through 1,000 different chemical analyses of different strain tests, I find that there's such a wide variation in quality between strains that it's really due to nutrient deficiencies that cause these quality and potency differences. And I just ran across a study out of Spain that shows that, yeah, it turns out that manganese is critical for CBD and THC, and iron is critical for other, elements to be synthesized. So the connection with minerals, with our health, is profound. The connection with our Earth periodic complement is profound. And my overlapping knowledges in so many different arenas brings me to a completely different view of the universe, which is even below electric. I mean, it's all electric, because when you start colliding matter, the only thing left, the last particles left in particle collisions, are electrons and positrons, and they spin off into more and more microparticles that created those. So when we talk about how we're connected to the star, our galaxy, our atoms, our fellow humans, there's really a very strong connection. They call it entanglement, but really it's because the entanglement particle is so small it can't be imaged, and only can be indirectly experienced. So my whole thrust right now is the electric universe and the interaction of food and minerals and how it benefits us.
Yeah. What's your take on the glyphosate celiac disease
That's
connection?
easy. Well, that's easy. Let's do two things here. It's actually not glyphosate that's the problem. It's actually the surfactant. The surfactant is called polyethylene oxalated taloamine. And Mary Seneff and another guy did a great study on this that showed that this surfactant, which makes glyphosate hydrophilic, because naturally it's hydrophobic, it doesn't want to stick to the leaf. The surfactant makes it stick to the leaf, which causes the mineral deficiencies, except for the genetics of the plants that can, deal with this, and kills all the other plants because it's a chelator. It's a heavy chelator for minerals. It does this in your body too, but it's the POEA. I'll just abbreviate the polyethylene chemical. That's really the problem, because the FDA says this is an inert ingredient in Roundup. But it's not, because it's an endocrine disruptor, which means it destroys tryptophan, phenylalanine, and alanine, so you don't get your neurochemicals, your neurological chemicals. You don't get your tryptophan and melatonin cascade. It breaks that cascade. So what this stuff does is and it's in everything. That's the problem. They're now actually spraying glyphosate on wheat and stress it to go to dry at late harvest, so it doesn't really wash off. It just gets concentrated on wheat. It also causes, they're doing with sugar and sugar cane, so sugar is heavily contaminated with these chemicals. And what happens with wheat is then twofold, because you're eating this charge of glyphosate and POEA, and what happens with the wheat is wheat does not digest in the human body. It doesn't have the peptides to dissolve the proteins in wheat. And what happens is it's not even the gluten, it's actually gliadin. There's the GLIA9 gene in wheat has been increased about 20-fold because of cross-pollination in the 60s by Borlaug, and then mutagenic changes with sodium actinide in the 80s by Clearfield wheat. That has actually just mutated the genetics, but it's caused a huge increase in gliadin, and gliadin is the protein that absolutely irritates the colon lining and causes celiacs. It's not gluten. And then this gets into a whole different issue, because then you have these companies saying, well, we have gluten-free foods. And, Eli Lilly, that makes insulin, the insulin substitute, and Disney have gone into a partnership to make these books for children with type 1 diabetes for these gluten-free diets. But when you analyze the diets, they're using rice flour, tapioca flour, and another beet flour. And these have higher glycemic index than sugar. So it actually damages the pancreas more, because it's not the gluten. So when you go gluten-free, you're actually hurting yourself more, because you're stressing your pancreas, which then put out so much insulin you become insulin intolerant, and you desensitize your insulin receptor size. And it's just such if I didn't think it wasn't if I didn't think it wasn't some plan, because I think it may be, that I just think is just so stupid and so moronic that you just don't understand human health at all to allow these things to happen in the general population. That's the problem with the wheat and with the glyphosate.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really an insidious issue because a lot of people are addicted to wheat because it has a high glycemic index. It pings the opiate sensors in the brain, which then addicts you to wheat, just like if you were on heroin. Every 4 or 5 hours, you got to have another fix.
Yeah.
Well, every 45 hours, you have another fix of the high glycemic index wheat, which then stresses your pancreas, which then causes over pancreatic enzyme production, insulin production, which then starts burning out your pancreas and leading you down the road to diabetes.
I see. Yeah, definitely. Can you explain the antioxidant and this problem with neutralizing free radicals
Oh,
to help
sure,
us
sure.
understand it?
This is really interesting too because a lot of people say you need to take lots and lots of antioxidants, and there are some that you absolutely should eat every day. Okay, ubiquinol, which is CoQ10. It is probably the most profound electron donator molecule that your body normally makes in the liver, unless your liver is stressed from the toxins and the chemical exposure you've been to. And what it does, it provides electrons, and those electrons are used in the mitochondria especially. In the mitochondria are these organelles. There's an organelle inside each cell, and there's 4 chemical steps that change glucose into energy using magnesium. One of those steps creates superoxide, which is an O2 with missing electrons. So it's wanting to rip electrons off of anything. Unfortunately, without adequate superoxide dismutase, and this particular molecule exists in several tissues, not just in the mitochondria, but also in the bone, in the blood, and blood cells. That without the dismutase to neutralize the free radical, then you end up with a lot of ripped up tissue in the mitochondria. Mitochondria fail. You end up with no energy. You see these people as they get older that they have no energy. They're like, they're just almost falling asleep at the wheel. But the thing is, yeah, CoQ10 is there. CoQ10 is naturally made in that system to counteract that problem. But the problem is the decompositional, it's a metabolic decomposition molecule of tryptophan using that same process mimics CoQ10. The body detects you have CoQ10 and it starts making less because it thinks it has enough. So you've got an already pre-planned failure by an incorrect molecule due to metabolic processes. So you need to take CoQ10. The other thing you need are minerals because iron, manganese, magnesium, zinc, and I think are essential for the different types of superoxide dismutase. And these elements actually break off the molecule and actually gather up the hydrogen onto the OO and make it H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. Then the iron breaks off, it breaks that up into oxygen and water. And of course, by scavenging the hydrogen out of the cells and especially the mitochondria, you relieve the inflammation, which is the acid state, and you naturally make yourself into an alkaline condition, which is very difficult for diseases to get going in. So your mineral load has a lot to do with your ability to stay alkaline. And you can drink alkaline water, and it does kind of work temporarily, but your body's going to buffer yourself back to 7 anyway. But the minerals are designed to actually keep you in an alkaline state.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
So we had a couple articles. One of them was antioxidants dispel static electricity, and can electrons act as antioxidants?
That's how it works.
Did you have time to
The
review?
electric these superoxide molecules, which are oxygen or electron deficient, are trying to gather electrons. And what they'll do is they'll take them off of cholesterol on the cell membranes or anything they can to satisfy that desire to become in a balanced state. So if you have a molecule like CoQ10 or other antioxidants, you end up with molecules that actually will donate electrons and neutralize those free radicals and reduce the effects of oxidative stress. Now, one way to do that is to ground yourself. We talked briefly about this. I saw the email you sent out, and I've been following the Longevity Now conference guys and David Wolf and Dave Rowski and especially Clint Ober, who came up with this. And he noticed that he was finding a new path in life, and he was out, I think in Sonoma, and he noticed that everybody he was looking at had shoes on, insulated shoes, which insulates you from the earth. You no longer go out in bare feet. I mean, remember when we were kids, man? We used to run around bare feet all the time. We were totally healthy.
Right.
Well, there's a one-to-one relationship with your ability to absorb the naturally occurring electrons in the earth that are conducting up into space into the electromagnetic field, that you can connect with bare feet to induct huge amounts of electricity through your K1, pressure point on your feet, for one, and through the whole series of sensors on your bare feet, and neutralize the positive ionization of your body tissues by radio frequencies, RF, cell phone towers, all that stuff that we're exposed to. My suggestion is every morning get up and get out there, and if it's snowy, get the snow off the ground and pour some water on the ground so you get a good conductor. And stand out there in your bare feet for 10 or 15 minutes if you can take it.
Yeah.
Or you can get a grounding sheet from, I think it's Longevity Warehouse, and you can just put a sheet on your bed that plugs into the ground plug in your wall socket and just sleep on it all night. You can ground yourself all night long. I do that personally.
Yeah, that's what I have too, some silver threaded sheets, and I tell you, it helps tremendously. Some of the effects of grounding, are tremendous on inflammation, the immune response, wound healing, prevention and treatment of chronic inflammatory diseases and autoimmune diseases. So there's a lot of great studies done on this. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to support this. I mean,
when you think about it, there's a whole bunch of foods you can eat, like tomatoes and watermelon with lycopene.
Yeah.
So you're designed to utilize the UVA and UVB we get from sunlight because we need it. Our eyes need it. We use too much sunglasses. Your eyes need that full spectral frequency range. You protect your body with food and minerals, and you can actually enjoy the sun.
That's interesting. So there's clearly a potential difference between a human's head and the foot, somewhere around 552 volts.
Yep.
And you're saying by grounding, by connecting to the earth, we're going to balance that potential back to zero, allowing electrons to be replaced or discharged to provide
well,
that
not
balance?
Replace so much as just have the electron deficits neutralized.
Yeah.
If you've got electron deficits, in other words, you've got molecules that are dying for electrons, they're in an inflamed state. You need to take that inflammation down. Inflammation is the cause of all illness. So it leads to every illness. You can get it from demineralization. You can get it from ionization. But yeah, it's so simple just to go walk outside in the grass or dirt.
Yeah, the Feynman lectures shed a lot of light to this subject for me. I'll add those links underneath this video for everything that we've discussed here.
Yep. No, Dick was pretty cool, man.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and move to the panel. Does anybody have anything they want to add to this conversation or any questions for Dr. Dunning? We have Dr. Kong Pop on the line and Eugene Bagashoff, as well as Philip Francis from Electric Cosmology, and of course Billy. Go ahead.
One question.
Philip.
Have you? It's like it seems like there's a lot of benefits from grounding, and from your experience, what kind of improvement that you can observe from doing this, from personal experience?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing you'll notice is you dream more. And that's interesting because if you're dreaming, you're getting into sleep state 4, okay, which is deep REM.
Yeah.
And so if you're able to get down into those deep sleep states, then it's helping that cascade from tryptophan to melatonin in the pineal gland to the pineal gland stimulating the hypothalamus to release the releasing factors to let the pituitary work at night, because if that's blocked up, you don't get into those deep sleep states. So it seems to, by indirect observation of an increase in dreams, that it seems to be stimulating that pathway. And that's really, really important because a lot of people go to bed too late. If you don't get to bed by 10 or 11 o'clock and you're not in deep sleep by 11:30, then you don't get that HGH pulse at 12:30 every night, because our bodies are tuned to a circadian rhythm on this planet based on solar input. And because of that, you'll lose that pulse at 12:30. There's two actually. There's one at 12:30 at night and one around 10 in the morning. But it's the big ones at night. And so as many times in a row as you negate that pulse of HGH, you're actually degrading your tissues and causing your body the inability to get into a deep sleep state to actually do heavy healing.
That's interesting.
I know we're all really night owls when we were kids. I mean, in rock and roll, man, I used to stay up all night long and go to sleep at 4 in the morning, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, now that I've become wiser, older, I'm 64 right now.
Yeah, one of the big benefits that I have noticed, one of the largest benefit is probably the sleep. I was able to get a consistent 8 to 9 hours of sleep after grounding, and before that I was lucky to get 4 hours of sleep. But I really noticed the reduction in inflammation as well. It seems to really play a big role in that, and blood flow as well. I believe my blood flow has been improved with grounding.
Certainly. Now, there's also something I'd like to tell you all about. You should know about. There's two chemicals. The Japanese have been using this for a long time. You're familiar with fermented soybeans called natto, right? Well, there's an enzyme called nattokinase that is known as an anti-inflammatory. There's a new one that the Germans have been experimenting for only about 30 years called seropeptase, seropeaptase, seropeptase. Seropeptase is extremely promising because it eats all the necrotic tissue in your bloodstream, gets rid of plaques, gets rid of tumors. Seropeptase and nattokinase. And you want to take them two together because the nattokinase tends to suppress the action of clotting due to all this stuff being relieved from the vascular wall. But there have been cases where people were supposed to go in for triple bypass, quadruple bypass, but just by being on these chemicals, that surgery never took place. Another patient was supposed to have a hand amputated after taking these drugs. That surgery didn't take place. This stuff really works. Seropeptase and nattokinase. These are very important right now.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
What I was wondering was, because our existence on this earth has always gone through massive electrical changes with the sun anyway, will our bodies adapt to the changes, the artificial changes, or is it just too much?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point, Philip. You know, we have a condition right now, politically and environmentally, that we have. Actually, it's political, global, and environmental that have been mixed together into this stupid idea of global warming. Okay, because it's not global warming. The problem is not global warming, even if it was due to carbon, and you stop making carbon with fossil fuels, and you keep making electricity with green energy, you're still going to provide the companies that are causing the real problem with the ability to keep that problem going, which is global chemical pollution. We have an environmental pollution issue that will kill us long before climate does, because we've survived 50 or 60 different climatic epochs since we were kind of a species 4 million years ago. We're not challenged by climate at all. We're challenged by chemicals. Now, because these chemicals are everywhere, especially the plastics, the phthalates in plastics are probably our worst enemy, because they clog up the liver, they clog up the thyroid. You end up with thyroid malfunction, which causes all kinds of problems. You have liver malfunction, and you'll notice that the rate of liver disease has gone up dramatically since really heavy-duty plastics used in bottled water, because that's where we mostly get them, and saran wrap, and using microwave plastics, where these things just get impregnated into the foods, and your body can't deal with it. So it puts it in specific tissues, and that's our biggest problem, is the phthalate plastics. We'll find that if we start really bleeding those things out, and the way to do it is to do gallbladder flushes, kidney flushes, get rid of your parasite load. Everybody should do a parasite cleanse, and get a far infrared sauna and start doing saunas, because that just brings it right out of your skin.
Well, that's interesting.
So there are ways to get rid of it, but you've got to detox now in this extremely toxic period, because we're really probably going to go into a glacial period. We're just on the end of an interglacial warm-up period, and we're due to fall down again. This last 20, what is it? Go ahead.
So, carry on.
Well, yeah, what we've seen and what Ben has also seen is that we're in a situation where there's so much solar quiet. I mean, there's an Earth-facing calm most of the time. There's less sunspots than there's ever been in 200 years or something, and we end up with a situation where, boy, that sure looks like right before the moment minimum, where we have this grand minimum about to occur that could last for 90,000 years, not just 200 or 300, where the sun accidentally kicked back on back in the 1700s. But we may be facing a real issue, and with a decreasing magnetic field, a decreasing solar activity, which puts less particles in the solar atmosphere, which allows cosmic radiation to come in and to ionize nitrogen, C14, and the effects of higher cosmic radiation on genetics with a lower magnetic field, we have problems that have nothing to do with fossil fuels. And it's when I talk to people about what to do, I'm advising everybody, get away from the northern latitudes. Try finding some place near the equator. It may be the only place where we may have a strong enough magnetic field to actually protect us from some of the things about to occur. I mean, I'm thinking about Panama and Ecuador personally.
Ecuador just had a volcano go off.
Yeah, that's okay. They're good things. Just be upwind from them.
Right.
I have to say that if you look at these maps that the ESA Swarm mission have produced, the maps of the changing magnetic field of Earth, so you'd see that the most diminishing of the field occurs in the western hemisphere. So exactly above the equatorial region, it's the most...
over on the Atlantic side and in Chile and
in the Americas,
Argentina.
Yes.
Yeah.
Over the Americas, the field diminishes the fastest on the planet.
There's a South Atlantic anomaly, which is interesting too. So there's some kind of a big magnetic anomaly down there. I'm not sure if it's gravitational or just a huge lump of mass under there. But yeah, one of the things I'm working on at Caltech are magnetic glasses, which are these. It's not just regular metallic glass, which is a series of alloys that are being used in shielding for spacecraft and electronics, but a magnetic version that may actually, deflect or reflect intense radiation from the sun. And if we can get those things going, there may be a way to at least have the stuff over your sleeping area at night, where you can sleep underneath a shield. And but yeah, I agree with you. There may be no place to hide. I've been watching the swarm stuff too, and I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, I just posted the link to the discussion. You might see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to see that. Thank you. I need more information on that.
Yeah, we'll post that under the video as well. Does anybody else have any points or questions? Billy, you've been pretty quiet.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it.
Well, here, actually, I want to talk to Billy a little bit because, I saw your video on how you took a electromagnetic signal and arced it through a gas arc. Remember that video you did? You actually were using Ben's broadcast as the source. And now we have these electrical discharges in an atmosphere that can come from electromagnetic forces, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my thing I want to talk to you over the past couple of months since I saw that was that when we have these huge electromagnetic outbursts of the sun, not the ones we normally get, but stuff like back at the time of Charlemagne, that 774 event where it was like 19,000 nanotesla strength.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's like, I wonder, because there was no records back then, what the lightning effects were during those kind of huge outbursts of energy and radiation hitting the Earth, because we never have any real records of those kind of things. And after I saw your video, I thought, whoa, isn't that interesting? I talked briefly with Dave Talbot, because he's very, very ingrained in this idea of lightning bolts of the gods and so forth. And you just described a process that would certainly create a possibility of those effects happening on gas planet surfaces when I saw that video.
Yeah, it kind of blew me away too when I saw it.
Because if you need something big enough to cut canyons in a planet, you need some kind of gas atmosphere, and Mars's atmosphere was thicker before it was blown off by the sun.
I totally agree.
And that, according to Robitaille, these stars were much hotter and much more active. Not the current model they have, but his model, which I think is more correct. And that early on, when Mars was losing his atmosphere, it was losing it from two reasons. One, didn't have a magnetic field to hold it. Two, he had huge amounts of solar activity blowing it away with these huge storms. And we've seen that. I mean, I talked about it in my talk. There was a 1983, the Halloween storm, I think it was, or 93 rather, or no, 2004. That when the Mars Global Surveyor recorded a release of planetary atmosphere larger than they've ever seen, reminiscent of what happened when Mars was losing its atmosphere.
Mm.
Yeah, so these storms happen quickly, but I kind of want to get on Dave Talbot's case with this under certain conditions earlier on, where yes, some of these big chasms could have been cut earlier, and then it just eroded with normal erosion.
Yeah.
But bringing that down to home, okay, we sit in a field that's inducting elements all the time from the sun at the geomagnetic cusp. They're falling in. We get a lot of meteoric dust coming into the atmosphere. These meteors vaporize into elements. We get 20 tons, I think, per day coming in from space, and that there's the oceans, which is where I get my minerals from, are actually a combination of what washes out of the ground into the rivers, into the oceans as basins, what comes up out of the smokers, the white and black smokers at the continental rift zones, which are, blowing minerals into the oceans, and the solar stuff that's coming in. So we've got, the ocean is really a combination of solar ions, earth ions, and geologic ions. And when we start taking the elemental analysis of that stuff, there's, of course, magnesium and calcium, primarily sulfur, iron, cobalt, manganese, copper, zinc, that kind of stuff. And of course, all the other stuff, all the real fine stuff, parts per billion, niobium and things like that. But what's funny is we see like 9 billion species in the ocean that are pretty healthy unless they come in contact with human chemicals. And they also have a very, very long lifespans. So we've perfected a way to take the minerals out of the ocean without the salt. We have a product called My Grow Minerals. You can get it on our site, ecoorganics.com. And people are feeding it to their dogs and livestock, and even some people are actually drinking the stuff themselves. But a lot of people are using the stuff to grow at least a big pot of tomatoes during the summertime, so you can mineralize some food. And we see a lot of reversal in health issues by just mineralizing your diet to some degree. We've seen people use our grow minerals just as a mineral tonic, just a tablespoon a day in a big glass of water. And we've seen the hair grow faster, nails grow faster, skin clears up, have more energy. And of course, these ionic elements go right in and start stimulating the genetics. Because the reason minerals are so important for the body is not just their metabolic function, is the fact that the movement of mineral ions in the body causes the DNA to expand and contract. And just like a piezoelectric crystal, that DNA expands, and then when it contracts and pressurizes, it pumps out biophotons. Are you guys familiar with the biophoton work of Fritz Albert Pop?
No, sir.
Yeah, get into that. Philip, have you heard of it?
No, but I have trouble with the concept of photons anyway. So I'd have to see it from an electromagnetic wave point of view.
Oh, sure. Well, in a sense, it kind of is. But in fact, I'll send you the articles and papers he's written on it. It's really fascinating because he's shown the biophotonic output of cucumbers and all these things are much higher during certain phases of their growth. And there's some evidence that shows that the biophotonic penetration of cells may have a lot more to do with instructing the metabolic processes than even the chemicals are. I'm not sold on it. Don't get me wrong on this, Phil.
Yeah.
I'm not completely sold on it.
I would see it as a wave interaction.
Sure.
And yeah, I'd certainly like to have a look at that.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. I think it was kind of weird when I first saw it, but then I started reading it 2 or 3 times because the output seems to be coherent. It's not random. It's not just heat. Yeah.
The thing with light is because it's on the cusp of the ionizing part of the electromagnetic spectrum and the non-ionizing part, it does have certain qualities and then lengths of the spectrum. So obviously, when we get into ultraviolet, we're hitting the ionizing section, and that's why we start burning. Our skin burns and surfaces deteriorate. So I should imagine it would be the fact because it's on that cusp where the atoms of the surfaces are being excited but not damaged. It could well be having that sort of effect, I would have thought.
Again, it's really groundbreaking stuff that he did. He's no longer with us, unfortunately.
Yeah, if you want
but there's a bunch of groundbreaking stuff out there. I like the stuff from Pollock. What's his name?
Yeah,
Did the fourth phase water stuff?
Gerald Pollock,
yeah. Yeah, I talked to Gerald a couple of times. I actually made a fourth phase water generator. I took a 600 nanometer red therapy light and have put it on the bottom facing up into a modified coffee mug, a coffee pot rather, because it has that little depression in it, so it has like a reservoir on the bottom kind of thing. And I melt ice in it. And what I've found is that the ice doesn't melt very fast under the influence of this infrared. In fact, it melts a lot slower than if I just leave it exposed to the room. And the water that first collects in that little reservoir area is a little slippier, a little slicker for some reason, which would kind of...
Is it a cold light you're putting on it? Because obviously infrared would
it's a cold infrared. It's not a hot infrared. It's a cold.
Okay.
It's just LEDs. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's interesting. I've been playing around with it, and it's so subjective. I can't say it does one thing or the other, but I'm willing to play around with it at least.
Oh, it's certainly an area of research that needs to be explored, I would have thought.
Well, it's funny because the exclusion zone is actually very, very small. So that's my only concern of what I've tried to do. Now, it's funny, though, if you'll notice when people go in for like mouth surgery and tonsillectomies and stuff, they tell people to suck on ice.
Of course.
And sucking on ice, for instance, will relieve some of those fourth phase molecules into the throat, and maybe it has something to do with healing. Who knows?
It's interesting.
Going back to the plastics, would it be the fact that it has a dielectric property that's actually stopping the electrons being absorbed by the body? And that's actually...
I couldn't say for sure, but I think it certainly has something to do with it because they have to collect in some fashion. It has to be a positive and a negative attraction to actually have them stick. When you talk about molecules, you're talking about these combinations of atoms that are not really attached to each other except for these electromagnetic weak forces that have specific malleability. I mean, if you look at what a metabolic pathway really is, a molecule is in one shape that when it attaches to another molecule, it bends that shape. And then when that molecule is attained, that other one's shape bend, it gets off of it. But that shape bend makes it ready to combine with another one that it could have never combined with had it not had that substrate first. So we have these issues in the body where our electric bodies have a lot to do with our metabolic processes. So yeah, Philip, I think you're absolutely right. I think these phthalates are extremely electroactive and want to grab onto cell tissue, especially membranes of cells, probably lipid attractants.
That's great. We got a couple more minutes. Is there anything anybody else would like to add?
Well, just going back to magnetic field, I suppose, seeing it come in conversation. The fact of where the magnetic field of a planet comes from, what I actually think is the water content mixed with the granites and the high capacity to hold charge in granites. And I'm wondering, on Mars, even though it had its atmosphere stripped away, whether it was actually a loss of water and whether the magnetic field there could have, because it's in patches, whether that would be the best place to look for water on Mars, which would be under the magnetic patches.
Well, here's the thing I found is that when planetary disks form in the galactic gases, that the very volatile materials are out further in the solar system. The heavier materials are in the inner solar system. And Mars seems to have a very high iron and sulfur content And iron sulfates just don't form magnetic fields. They just don't get molten and metallic enough to do it. During heating, during huge meteoric impacts and boloid impacts, you'll probably get some heating, okay? But what I've talked about at my talk at the conference is a completely different idea about our magnetic fields. Is after talking to Pierre Robitaille and understanding that these sunspots are not cold, they're actually planar condensations of hydrogen that exhibit a graphite spectrum, which means they're in hexagonal planes.
Yeah, turning to a metal.
Yes, but after I looked at that, I started looking at dwarf stars, which have higher magnetic fields than our sun and only about 2 or 3 times bigger than our Earth, which means if this is the case, they're probably not collapsed matter. They're probably a more condensed hydrogen. Now, when we look at the historic cosmological explanations of how life came into being in our solar system, you're left with the almost inescapable concept that there was a third star that was cast off of the Sirius system. 2 cultures talk about it, the Dogon and the Egyptians. That came into our star system and smacked up into a super Earth between Mars and Jupiter and created the asteroid belt and the Earth in this collision. But if this was a dwarf star with a high enough magnetic field, which is how they describe it, these wings off of this brown object and stuff, then it could be that some of those materials were inducted into the proto-Earth, because when it was smacked in half, some of that stellar material might have become our core. Some of that stellar material might have fallen onto Mars, or Mars collided with it. Some of that stellar material probably collided with the moon, because the moon was part of that whole event too out there. According to these histories, that moon of that super Earth is now our moon of this current Earth in the inner part of the solar system. And we see these extremely high magnetic anomalies on the moon and on Mars. So as far as water goes, we've already identified with the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter deep glacial deposits of water from former oceans as we lost the atmosphere on Mars that are 1,000 meters thick. So we have plenty of water to mine on Mars. And at the probably in the base of the Val Marineris and some of those areas, going to find a lot of water. So there's plenty of water on Mars to make chemicals for rockets and atmosphere for habitats. But when you bring up the magnetic anomalies, Philip, I would like them to start planning habitation under those anomalies, because they're the only place.
That's my opinion totally. It would be the best places to put them, I would have thought.
Agreed. Around Copernicus crater in the southern hemisphere, about 55 south, 180 east.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that was a great call. I appreciate everybody coming on and taking the time to participate today. It was very enlightening for me.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's stuff I haven't sort of know anything about. So yeah, Augustus was a great guest today.
Well, let me leave you guys with a couple of things that my partner and I have really realized recently, and it's really, I think, an important issue. We decided to go on a parasite cleanse about 3 months ago, and so much stuff came out of us. It was shocking. It was almost like if you'd never leave a rat to live inside of you, and if you get rid of your parasites, amazing things happen. We used to spend like $100 in pastries at the farmer's market every Saturday. We don't even like that stuff now. Now, I saw a video, and I suggest all of you find it. It's a TED Talk on parasites. And what it shows is these different types of parasites that get into these insects and sea monkeys and crickets and all this stuff that basically hijack their brain. And don't think it doesn't happen to us, because these organisms create chemicals that make us crave things to feed it that aren't good for us. And now that we no longer have these entities in us, we no longer crave sugars. We no longer have these weird desires for specific foods, because I'm pretty sure at this point our brains were hijacked. And I'll bet most of yours are too. So if you go on the Hulda-Clark regime, which is the black walnut hull powder and the wormwood and the clove, and look for it online and get on this stuff and get on it for a couple of months or 21 days, you'll be amazed what no longer is in you telling you what to do that you really don't want to do.